you so much for watching, listening. Totally stoked to have you here. And of course, you need to subscribe. Why? Because we have amazing content, seriously. And the jokes are incredible, right? So here's your joke. What has 4 wheels and flies? A garbage truck. You're like, what? Fly? Oh, I get it, right? I get it. So we're gonna do a short series. I'm calling this Soothing Psalms for September. Because I think in this time, it's nice to have some soothing things. September tends to be a nice month, but it's also sometimes a little bit harried because of school starting and stuff picking up and kind of routines, summer's over, and so all these things. So I just wanted to kind of give you some soothing psalms for you to think about for September. And in this, I was looking at different ones, and I was thinking about David and all the events and things that David went through in his life, and there are psalms to match up with a lot of those events. So this particular episode, I want to look at Psalms 56, and it ties in with 1 Samuel 21, verse 10. And in this verse in 1 Samuel, David is running from Saul. Saul is the king of Israel, murderous, trying to kill David. He's threatened by David. David's running for his life, and he does that for well over a decade, trying to keep safe, run away from Saul. But at one point, David runs over to the Philistine area, and when he's there, the Philistines, who were the sworn enemies to Israel, the Philistines are like, oh my goodness, this is David, we need to kill him. And David pretends to be crazy. Like, he lets his saliva run down his beard, and he bangs, scratches on the doors and stuff, and he acts like he's a lunatic, so that they don't try to kill him. And the king of that area, Achish, he's like, I don't need another crazy man in my city. And so that's what's happening in David's life when he writes Psalms 56. And so that gives you some context, because sometimes when we just read the Psalms and we don't know what's the context, why is he writing this, what's the backstory for it, then once we understand, then it helps us appreciate the Psalm even more. And I think for you, I would encourage you that maybe there's some things happening in your life that are difficult, some hardships, some struggles. Maybe you're not so squashed to the end, you have to pretend like you're insane. Maybe it's not quite that much for you, but no matter what, I still think that we can identify with David and the pressures and the struggles that he had, that he was going through, and read this psalm to encourage our own souls. So a couple verses that I pulled out that I thought would be helpful to you, soothing, for this psalm, is in verse 3, David says, when I am afraid, I will put my trust in you, God. And I really want to encourage you. That's a very helpful psalm, when you are afraid. And you're like, well, I'm never afraid. Well, probably you are. You can be afraid of a lot of different things. Some of them seem to be irrational. Personally, I don't really like snakes. That's a real problem for me. It's irrational, and everybody's like, well, it's just small, little. I don't care. But when I am afraid, and it might be a big thing, where you're like, well, I'm afraid of a doctor's diagnosis. I'm afraid of what happens if I get kicked out of this job. What happens if I don't get in? There's a lot of things we can be afraid of: uncertainty, the unknown, the future, whatever. But when I am afraid, I will put my trust in God. So fear is the trigger for trust. Another verse that I really like is in verse 4. It says, in God, whose word I praise, in God I put my trust. I shall not be afraid. What can mere man do to me? And sometimes we have a fear of man. And sometimes it's rightfully so. Sometimes people have been not good and said mean, done mean things. But no matter what, when we keep our trust in God, what can man do? Because if God is for you, then who can be against you? Another verse that's encouraging in Psalm 56 is verse 9. It says, then my enemies will turn back on the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. Again, God is for you. If God is for you, who can be against you? God is for you. And this psalm, again and again and again, David goes back to and settles in and kind of puts like a stake in the ground, and he rotates around that stake in the ground. I trust God. No matter what's happening, I still trust God. I still come back to that stake in the ground. I trust God. And so I think that's a really soothing psalm, but also very encouraging to you that no matter what's happening around you, no matter what's going, that's always what we return back to. Our default is that we trust God. Because when we do that, we will find great comfort, great strength for our soul, and great hope, because that's who God is for us. And then verse 13, it says, "For you have delivered my soul from death, indeed my feet from stumbling, so that I may walk before God in the light of the living." And I just read a couple of those verses to you from this psalm, because I want you to, again, appreciate David's in a really difficult situation, and yet he still finds his hope, his confidence, security. He comes back to trusting in God, because that is our soothing psalm for September, Psalm 56. And no matter what's happening around you, that we can always come back to trusting in God. So thank you for subscribing. Of course, hit the notification bell right there. That'll keep you posted when we put new content up. And here's a question for you to answer. You can leave it in the comments now. What do you like about David? What do you like about David in the Bible? You're like, I know a lot of Davids. My son's name is David. You're like, David. Oh, I like in the Bible. What do you like about David? So just write that in the comments. You can say anything. No anxious, no judgment, whatever. But tune in next week, because we'll have a new episode for Soothing Psalms in September.